Well, hello, builders of good. Thank you for tuning in to the Build Good Fundraising podcast. Fundraising isn't easy, but it should be simple. So on this show, we take the mystery out of raising money. Now, in every episode, we coach you how to build your fundraising like a flywheel. The flywheel has 5 steps. Number 1 is to listen to your donors. Number 2 is to engage them. Number 3 is asking the right people for the right things. Number 4 is celebrating their generosity and supporting a giving habit. And number 5 is reporting back in a way that is responsive and in the moment and ongoing, so donors know that their philanthropy is effective. Now, if you master the 5 parts of the flywheel, your fundraising flywheel will start to spin reliably with less effort on your part as you go along. Your revenue will grow, and so will your career. So every week, we focus on one part of the flywheel, and today we are focusing on asking. And we've got Stephen Screen with us today. Stephen is the founder of the Better Fundraising company. He's a veteran direct response fundraiser. He's been doing this for 25 some years. And he used to do this for big national shops, doing direct mail, direct response TV, and now he's doing it for small and medium-sized shops, taking all of those learnings, all of those tactics and strategies that the big guys use, and making them super accessible to smaller and mid-sized nonprofits. And the thing we're going to talk about today is how to craft an effective fundraising offer. Stephen, thanks for being here.
Mike, thanks for having me. Joy and a privilege.
At the before we get at the beginning of COVID, we were talking on the phone, and you gave me some business advice. And I'm a pretty simple man. I hear advice from somebody like you who's way ahead in their career, who's many steps ahead. I just listen and I do it, and it's been a game changer. So thank you for doing that. And at that time, we said, hey, you should come on the podcast. And then I think like a week or two later, COVID hit, and we both got really busy, and we haven't stopped being busy for 3 years. So I'm glad we can make this work today.
Yeah, me too. Thanks for having me. And yes, it was a busy 3 years.
Yeah. Well, let's start here. We're talking about offers, right? Like fundraising offers. Let's just start with the basics. What is a fundraising offer?
The way I would define it in a way that I think is helpful for folks to think about it is an offer is the promise a piece of fundraising makes for what will happen if a donor gives a gift today. So a promise that a piece of fundraising makes for what will happen if the donor gives a gift today. There's the sort of short blurby definition.
Now, that sounds pretty like, okay, so we're going to make a promise and something will happen. Is that as basic as it gets?
I mean, let's see. There's, as you know, there's a whole bunch of different levels here, but more or less every piece of fundraising has an offer, whether you're thinking about it or not. A letter or an email or a radio show that ends with, will you give a gift today and partner with us to do the thing, is the offer is, if I give a gift, I will partner with the organization and do something. I will end poverty in Malawi, or I will support this local ministry, whatever. There is an offer in every single piece of fundraising that goes out there. The big idea, I mean, there might be a couple of big ideas, but the big idea is that some offers work a lot better than others. And so it's sort of our job as fundraisers and on behalf of the beneficiaries and causes that we serve to figure out which offers work best.
Mm-hmm. Would you agree with this? Like, all fundraising is basically just a vehicle to deliver an offer?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. That's the way I was taught, and have found it to be true. And so when it comes time to develop a letter or an email or a radio show, whatever, you figure out what's the offer, and then you can. By the way, the same thing is true for events. Then you construct every single part of that direct mail package, radiothon, event, run of show to deliver the offer in the most powerful way possible.
Right. Yeah. So everything is supporting the offer, right? Like, it begins and ends with the offer. And if you have that kind of a mindset, you go to write a piece of direct mail, you go to write an email, you go to design an event, you go to write a grant, you go to ask for institutional funding from government. It all revolves around how is this going to support the offer and make the offer more salient.
Yes, that's right. So a couple things to add to that I think help people think about this is back in my big agency days when we're helping large, I mean, all of the name nonprofits in the US and some in Canada. The very first question you ask when you come into the meeting, you talk about the next project is, what's the offer?
Right.
It is the question. It's not what's the theme or what are we interested in right now, or right. It's what's the offer. So that's the first thing. Then the really big idea that this is just in the past year that I've been developing this, that people are finding helpful, is that I want people to see how having a good offer, which I'm sure we'll dig into the details of, makes your fundraising more inclusive. What happens is most organizations are operating on a belief that is something like, if people knew more about what we did and came to believe the things that we believe, they would give more. And that is an exclusive offer because it requires the donor to understand a lot of stuff. You have to understand all of the things that an organization does. You have to understand how an organization thinks about its processes and programs. You have to understand an organization's approach to, right? So there's a whole bunch of barriers that are put up. Whereas a good offer is inclusive because it makes the fundraising very simple for the donor to say yes or no to. It allows anybody at any level of expertise, at any level of reading level, at any level of eyesight to say yes. And so that ends up, what the result there is, it's more inclusive, and you get a more heterogeneous donor base.
Right. I want to riff on that a little bit. I do want to get into the building blocks of a great offer, but
sure,
since we've started going down this path, I want to go. I want to go a little bit deeper here,
sure.
Because this is something that we often encounter, and I'm just going to use a very generic example. Let's say an organization that is doing international development, could be anything. You will often be in meetings where you say, well, you can't say that people are hungry, or you can't say that they don't have enough food. It's actually like, it's more complicated than that. Like, there's all these systems that work together. There's like access to nutritional, like that is missing, and then this part of the system. And so we would be simplifying it way too much by just saying, listen, people are fleeing civil war in Ethiopia, and they are hungry. They don't have enough food because it's not dignified. Now, our counter argument is always, says who? Because if my kid says I'm hungry, I don't pat him on the head and I say, no, sweetie, you're just experiencing access to pathways to nutrition. Hungry is undignified. Don't say you're hungry. It's undignified. You're a person experiencing hunger, whatever it is, right?
Yep.
So at some point, us intellectualizing the offer too much is a benefit that us working in the Western world in cushy nonprofit offices have, but the people that we're helping oftentimes describe themselves as being hungry. And it's not, if we think that's not dignified, well, that says more about us than about the person who doesn't have enough to eat.
Yeah, totally agree. And the way I think about it is organizations who would take the approach that you just spun up an example of are putting barriers between their work and donors supporting it, because they're saying, oh, the donor has to have our higher level of understanding of this thing. But in other words, I'm not going to simplify my work to make it more inclusive so that more people will do it and value it. What the way I've been thinking about this lately, Mike, is that most nonprofits, they have a higher ground understanding of their work and how they think about it. And they want all the donors to come to higher ground. And that's not good fundraising. Good fundraising is finding common ground and going to the common ground you share with the donor and talking to them in their language. And so that's, I don't want to spend too much time on the inclusive concept, but that's good fundraising, going to the donors where they are, finding common ground, because every organization has a lot more common ground with donors than they have higher ground with donors. And so if you're always on the higher ground, you will remain smaller than you could be. You will remain doing less than you could be doing.
Mm. And that's not to say along the way, you can definitely help donors become closer to your cause and gain a deeper understanding. But
absolutely,
if you win hearts, it'll be a lot easier to win heads as well, right? But trying to start by educating people, or if they, like you said, if they only knew what we knew, if they only understood this topic really deeply like we do, of course this is a no-brainer they would give.
Yeah.
Yep. All right. Well, you mentioned that some offers are the big ideas, that some offers work really well and other offers don't work as much. And we've seen huge organizations built on a single offer. Child sponsorship, that's one offer that's built multi-billion-dollar organizations. The heifer model, right? Like give an animal to a family who needs it. Kiva, microloans, very simple to understand offer. Yeah. Not very simple work. Microloans, very complicated, but the offer is very simple. You lend money to somebody, they use that money to start a small business and pay the money back.
Yep.
What differentiates an amazing offer from a mediocre one?
Well, let's see. Good question. At its sort of simplest, the donor has to care about whatever the offer is about. So in other words, this is the easiest to illustrate in political things, but if you say, hey, your gift today will help pass a piece of legislation that will do this progressive thing. It could be a great offer to progressives, but it's not going to be a great offer to liberals, to more conservative folks, right? So there needs to be an alignment of values between the donor and what's being presented. That's why, by the way, I'm always trying to go to common ground instead of higher ground, because common ground values are held by more people. Number two, then you get into some specifics where, generally speaking, there are four. There needs to be some problem that the donor understands. There needs to be a solution to that problem. There needs to be a cost to that solution. And there needs to be urgency to provide the solution now. So if you have those four elements, and we could talk about those in a bunch of different ways, but the sort of simplest way to illustrate that is like, there's a horse that is sick. It needs medicine. It will take $15 to cure the ailment that will allow the horse to have a happy, healthy life. So I've got a problem, I've got a solution, I've got a cost, and I've got a benefit. And the thing I didn't add there in that made up example is urgency, and that the horse needs to be receive the medicine in 3 weeks, or there are going to be a bunch of negative consequences.
Right.
So those items are the main ones.
Let's get into into those four building blocks on their own. So number one, you talked about there needs to be a problem, and that problem needs to be solvable, right? Is world hunger a good enough problem?
No. That's the short answer, because Jeff Brooks calls this fund crushing, not fundraising, because donors give because a problem is solvable, not because a problem is large. So we, as experts in our fields, and we've got program people in our ear often saying, well, 3,123 people die in Africa every day of hunger-related causes. Yep. The donor cannot solve that problem. So what I'm always trying to do is trying to put a solvable problem in front of the donor where they can see that their gift will make a meaningful difference. Conceptually, the way I think about it is you want a donor-shaped hole in every piece of fundraising that you send out. But it has to be the right size for each donor. So you go ask some big grant giving foundation for $1 million. You put $1 million sized hole in your grant application that they can fill perfectly. Mm-hmm. But to your mass donors, you put a $25 or $55 sized hole sized problem in front of them that the donor can meet perfectly. So that's what I see when people really start to understand fundraising, when they're like, okay, what's the size of the problem that I'm going to put in front of whatever audience I'm talking to right now?
Right. Yeah, let's drill down further into that. So world hunger is not a solvable problem. The donor knows she can't do that. And she probably might even think you're being a little bit disingenuous. Like, she knows that your organization likely won't solve world hunger,
Correct,
like on your own anyways.
mm-hmm.
So drilling down.
Can I jump in right there, Mike? Forgive me. This is where people start to tune out nonprofits, because nonprofits say untrue things all the time. Your gift will help solve world hunger. And the $100 donor's like, if they think at all, they're like, no. I mean, $100, that's good. That's nice. That's better than nothing. But $100 isn't going to help. And then on the reporting side, when nonprofits say your gift provided healing to 4,350 people, and I'm like, even if I'm a major donor at $1,000, my gift did not provide healing to 4,533 people. There's no way that's true. So nonprofits are in a sort of accidental way that we're trying to inflate our the good that we're doing, or the good that the donor has done. We say untrue things. And so you have to be really careful, again, to talk to donors saying true things.
Yeah, and part of that, I think, is driven by nonprofits being told you need to be bold and visionary. So they put out these like really lofty statements of like, in our lifetime, we will end homelessness, or in our lifetime, we will end world hunger. And that brand message drills down to fundraising, and you know, that's what we got to talk about. That's our big, hairy, ambitious goal from good to great that everybody started adopting. So so that makes a lot of sense. Now we are in an age of declining trust. So what you just said, I want to pause there for a second, which is nonprofits say untrue things all the time. We know that trust in society is declining, and we know that trust specifically in the nonprofit sector has been declining steadily. I also know that estimates show that like household giving, individual giving, could be down to single digits in 50 years if we don't do something to reverse the trend. So an offer is partly a way to build trust, because an offer is a promise, like you said before. And how do you build trust? Is you make a promise and you keep it. You make a promise and you keep it. You make a promise and you keep it. So if you're promising to end world hunger and you don't do it, then you're automatically seen as a little bit less trustworthy. But if you say, check this out, we can give a farmer in rural Malawi some seeds so they can start growing their own garden. Those seeds cost about $5 for this many grams of seeds. They will then grow these seeds. We give them training. The training costs about $15 for 4 weeks to train a family on how to do this. They will grow their crops. They will eat some of the crops. They will be able to sell some of the crops at the market. And that's how we solve hunger for that one family. And that's how you solve hunger for that one family, right? That's a little bit more trustworthy, but
absolutely.
But leadership often thinks it's the opposite. Leadership often thinks, and I understand where they're coming from, so we can drill down into that as well, the common objection, which is like, but we do so many things. And if a donor gives us to give seeds, but we also do training, we also do this, we also do that. We've got 90 other programs that we're running. We're being disingenuous by saying, you will provide this one thing for this one family.
Is a Nobel-winning physicist, when she teaches Physics 101, being disingenuous? Is the poster for Hamilton disingenuous because it doesn't list the stagehands? No, it's just sort of being smart and meeting donors where they are at and helping them take the next step, rather than asking them to take all of the steps and come to our level of understanding. And it's tapping into 70, 80 years of a bunch of smart people doing fundraising and measuring the results and seeing what donors tend to be more likely to respond to.
Right.
So it's a, now that said, right, there's generally speaking lousy fundraising training in North America. It's sort of not fair to expect organizational leaders who are often incredibly good at managing programs and running organizations to understand one small part of direct response marketing. So lots of compassion here. And
sure.
we have to be sharing these ideas, these truths, the stuff that the folks have learned over the last couple of decades, well, last few decades, to help.
Yeah. All right, let's we've broken it down into a small problem, and we've done that by basically taking the large problem, and we keep asking, okay, but what does that mean? Okay, well, how? Okay, well, how? Okay, well, how does that happen? Okay, well, how? And just like chunk it down into the most understandable problem for the donor, the thing that maybe if they close their eyes, they can see it. Maybe that's a good test. It's like if you can picture this thing, then that is a good problem, or you can see, touch it, feel it, whatever. Like you know what it is. Number two, then we've got to provide a solution that is easy to understand. What does that mean?
Well, let's see. It means that the donor feels like by helping to fund one action or one program or one part of one program, meaningful change will be made. Now, the devil is in the details in terms of like what's meaningful change, because an organization, so say you're an arts organization, because all of this conversation is a little tougher for organizations that do things that aren't as measurable, like seeds for a person in Malawi or a basketball for an inner city kid, right? Anyway, so you have to figure out what's meaningful change that's about the right size for the donor. And so, like one example for this, arts organizations that often talk about supporting the arts in our community, or you help build the symphony or something like that, you can change, you can go find some meaningful change that will happen. Well, you can build the arts in our community by making classical music training available to one middle school child for $20. Okay, well, so then I'm going to focus my piece of fundraising on the incredible power of one child hearing classical music for the first time and having it be explained to her. And that's the meaningful change I focus on. Even though I might live under the umbrella, the tagline of promoting the arts in our community, I focus my fundraising on these small, meaningful changes that can happen. Right. Again, promises that can be kept, but that the donors understand.
Yeah, I want to talk about education and healthcare causes a little bit. The eds and the meds, as we call them. Their fundraising sometimes looks a little bit different, because sometimes the problems that are being solved aren't as easy as new equipment for the hospital, or new warming blankets. That's easy. They're a little bit more like, well, generally the foundation supports the hospital, and they do like all these big things, and like you can't really break them down into an easy solution. And then higher education, you're often talking about scholarships, which are thousands of dollars, and although that offer seems to work okay, but like an annual giving, just the pure annual giving offer still works for higher education for some reason. But let's get a little bit into how can we frame a solution and a problem when the actual solution to the problem can't be broken down any further, and the most we've broken it down to still seems too big for a donor.
Well, let's see. I would actually, I guess I might say, I haven't found anything that you can't be broken down to some meaningful change that a $50 donor can make. But it does require some thinking. So let's go in the medical space and say you're working on pediatric cancer things. And so you're spending millions and millions of dollars on researches, give me a break, English. But your offer can still be, will you please send a gift today to help one child recover from pediatric cancer? Which is true. That one child is part of the thousands of children that ultimately this new treatment is going to help. But what we're trying to do is focus the fundraising on a thing that makes sense to the donor that they can do. Both in the eds and the meds. all of the time tend to ask donors to help all of the people. Will you help cure all the pediatric cancer? Will you send all the kids to our college? And again, that's sort of the donor doesn't feel like she can make a meaningful, the smaller donor doesn't feel like she can make a meaningful difference sending all the kids to your school. So you have to sort of set your, as a fundraiser, as an organization, you have to set your expertise aside, go down in the context and size at which the donor thinks, and go, you can help one child, you can help one student get a scholarship. You can help one. And yes, of course, you're helping lots more, but you're narrowing the donor's attention onto something that is more believable for her.
Let's move on to the cost of that solution. So we've got the problem, we've broken it down to you're going to help this one person. Now, the cost of the solution, for some, this is very easy. We give out this many food packs per year, and this is our overall budget for food. We divide that by this. Okay, perfect. $20 is a food pack, or $5 is $3 is a school lunch, or $3.95 is a meal. Those are fairly easy to figure out. How about some of the ones that are, it's actually thousands of dollars for treatment for one person? $50, yeah, can help that person, but it's not the full cost of treatment. Would you still go, here's a full cost of treatment and $50 can help toward that treatment? Or how do we start arriving at costs that make sense for a donor?
Yeah, so there are two ways to do that in sort of my toolkit. Number one is to, okay, so even when the full cost of treatment is, say, $17,000, the treatment can be broken down to a bunch of smaller parts. Mm-hmm. And you might say that intake from a loving, caring person at the front desk costs on average $35. And then so you would focus the appeal or whatever on, hey, listen, right now there are families going to the hospital. They are nervous. Their lives are on the line. And a lot of what matters is the first person they're met by. You, donor, for just $35 can ensure that every single child who comes through here is met by a loving, caring, blah, 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 right? And so, and then you say that's part of an overall treatment that costs $17,000, but not everybody can afford $17,000. So can you help at least one person be warmly greeted and checked in today?
Right.
Now, so I've broken down treatment into smaller and smaller chunks. That's one way, and that might not have been the best example, but hopefully it makes sense. The other way is to sort of do what I did earlier, which is to just talk about your gift of any size will help a child recover from pediatric cancer. And so you've narrowed the focus down to one child, even though the money is going into the research pot that is going to help lots of children. But it's true that the donor's gift is going to help one child.
Right. Yeah.
So that there's two different methods.
Yeah. We recently, pretty close to your example of the front desk, we recently worked with an organization as addictions treatment, very expensive sort of treatment.
Yeah.
So I don't know what the cost for the whole treatment was, but it's like a year-long program, right? So you're like room and boarding for one person for 1 year. But we just broke it down to the day, and then the offer became like you can give somebody their first day of freedom. Right? So that's like where you start, right?
So good.
Yeah.
So good. And again, that's just sort of making it it's making it more easily understandable to more people. I can understand my first day of freedom from addiction, as opposed to let me tell you about our holistic approach that has experts from multidisciplinary blah 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 blah.
Yeah. Let's get into urgency. A lot of people struggle with this because they are sensitive to some of the fake urgency tactics that are sometimes used in fundraising. And they want to be, super honest and ethical and transparent about it, which is fantastic. That is the right way to start. And so they end up not putting in urgency because they are afraid it will sound too sensational. How do we add urgency into our fundraising in a way that is ethical and meaningful?
Usually by changing the scale at which the fundraising piece is talking about what's going on. So we have the same discussion often with organizations who say, listen, I already have the budget for this year. There is no urgency to raise the money. Why would we have a deadline? Why would we have any urgency? Okay, that's a fine question, but and that would apply if I was saying to donors, "Hey, donor, I'm raising money for my organization. This whole organization's budget for the year is X. Will you please support the organization?" Okay, well that's fine. Then there is no urgency because the organization already has the money. However, if the fundraising is focused on a smaller scale thing, one child needing treatment, one person needing food, one person about to grow out of the time when, if they're exposed to arts, their heart can change towards the arts. Now it becomes urgent. Now it becomes, in many cases, an emergency for that one person at that one time.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're talking about that at that scale, and you're offering the donor the chance to play a role in helping that person, even if the organization is going to help the person 3 days from now, then you get, but the money goes in the bank account and it becomes part of all of the other things that are going on. And so anyway, that's my main argument. Is I usually say, you're thinking too large, you're thinking too much like a businessman. Let's talk about this one situation. And is this one person's current situation, is this urgent to solve? Yes. Okay, let's talk about that.
Right. Yeah. I want to get your take on a way that we sometimes add urgency. So we work with a hospital foundation that mostly treats people toward the end of their life. And so it's not an emergency room. People don't come in, rushed in with the ambulance and like you can help save a life by making sure that the emergency room is there. It is mostly, you can provide somebody like really high quality of care in a meaningful and loving end of their life. And that could be a year, it could be 5 years, could be 10 years. So that's a client that we're always working to, okay, why does it matter now? And one of the ways, if it's a project, we often say to keep this urgent project on track, because if it goes off track, there's all these negative consequences that are down the line. So then it's more so painting a picture of the negative consequences of nobody giving or nobody giving in time. So that's one way. The other way, which is always just like asking the client or yourself, well, if this all went away, if we closed our doors today, what of value would be missing in the world? And all of a sudden, you can come up with lots of reasons why it's urgent that donors give their money now, because people wouldn't have a loved one around. People wouldn't, they would spend their last year of their life being lonely and miserable. And instead of having wonderful memories about the life they had with their family, they would spend it anxious and depressed and alone. So just asking yourself, hey, what of value would be missing in the world if we went away today? I know we've got budget. Let's say we've got the budget. So why is it urgent for people to give today? Well, what of value would go away in the world if they stopped giving?
Yep. I think both of those are great questions and very much aligned with how I would think about it. I would say that to sort of speak to that alignment, the last part that you were saying, Mike, is just like me saying, shrink the scale and talk about the one patient who this is their one shot at this. After they pass, it doesn't matter. They've missed it. So they need it now. Then you often get into discussions with organizations about, well, we have this year's budget. Why are we raising money now? Which I find very weird because none of us do that in our personal lives, right? None of us are, you and I are working today, not because we need the money tomorrow, but because we know that, you keep doing this and you keep your savings up and hopefully growing, and then you're more insulated from shocks and blah, 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 blah. And it doesn't take away our urgency today. But for some reason we move in the nonprofit sphere. We're like, well, we've got the budget. We can't talk about like we need the money. It's like, I don't think that makes sense.
Right. Yeah.
So,
all right. So we've got a solvable problem, a solution that is easy to understand. The cost of the solution is a good deal. And we've got some urgency. Now, we've talked about negative consequences a little bit. Are you cool if we add that as a fifth step, which is like, there's like negative consequences of inaction?
Absolutely. Absolutely. That's one of those additional sort of layers of that make, when you're presenting an offer to a donor or a potential donor, that makes the offer more attractive, because it means that the donor gets to do two things. They get to provide the offer, the medicine for the horse, so to speak, and they get to stop the bad thing from happening.
Right.
So now my offer is twice as powerful to a donor because they're doing two things, not just one.
Yeah, they're solving a problem, and there's also a little bit of loss aversion in there, right? Which is like,
absolutely,
we hate for things to get worse more so than we want things to get better. So we often talk about negative consequences of an action being a little bit like salt and pepper. Like, you want some of it in there, but if you overdo it, it can sound a little like it can kind of ruin a meal a little bit. It can sound too sensational. But I'd be curious to hear from you about this. How do you use negative consequences of an action?
Let's see. To continue the analogy, as a spice, not too much, but they should be, well, hold on. If they are present, you will raise more, sort of period, end of story, in basically every test I have ever done. And I sort of, I don't think the attitude of never sharing negative consequences with donors holds water, because I don't understand why an organization is allowed to know those things, but not donors. Donors are adults. They can make decisions for why they're going to give or not give.
Right.
I think part of a job of a nonprofit organization is to be sharing the truth about what's going on in the world. And if we're only, and there's some portions of the, there's some values about how we do that, that occasionally cause you to share some of the truth and not share other parts of the truth. Okay, that's an interesting conversation. Let's go have it. Mm-hmm. I realize that's a little bit vague, Mike, but
sure.
Donors are adults.
Yep. Well, let's go to some questions. I know we've got questions. So Becky's gonna pull up some questions. Welcome back, Becky. Nice to see you.
Hello. Hi, Stephen. Nice to see you again.
Hi, Becky. You too.
You were noticing as you were talking, people were bringing up quotes that they really resonated with in the chat. And now there's a poster idea. We're all going to make posters of a quote that you just said here. So what you're saying has really resonated with people. Thank you so much. I know for me, I really appreciated what you said about finding common ground. I think a lot of times we ask donors to climb the mountain to where we are instead of us walking down the mountain to meet them where they are. So that's a really great reminder. So one of the questions we've got here is, can you speak a bit about who should make the offer? Whose voice is most effective? Is there a general rule? Does it change?
Yeah. Let's see. In general, the vast majority of the time, the offer should come from the highest ranking person at the organization. In direct response, generally speaking, you're trying to mimic a one-to-one relationship, and the donor is most respected by having their relationship with the highest ranking person, not the junior development officer, not the vice president of somebody, it's the president or the ED, as much as possible. And then every once in a while, it's good to sort of spice it up and have the director of program write, because he or she is really in touch with what's going on, and she can't wait to share some details. Right, there's a long history of rescue missions having successful letters written from the cook, a person who's right on the ground, who theoretically really understands what's going on. But in general, most of the time, and by that I mean 8 or 9 out of 10, from the highest ranking person you can get to sign the letters, be on the radiothon, you name it.
So you mentioned the cook. What do you think about an offer coming from a past beneficiary?
Let's see, complex question. That can be great, because the past beneficiary can speak meaningfully to the difference the donor's gift can make. But oftentimes, past beneficiary asks tend to all be good news. Oh, I'm doing great today. Things are going really well. Will you help continue this? And there's no problem for the donor to solve. And when there's no problem for the donor to solve, fewer people give. I tend to, if I can control the message to make sure that there's a problem we're asking the donor to solve today, a former beneficiary is great. I tend to sort of curate stories from former beneficiaries into my reporting, where you're sharing a problem that is already solved.
That's great. I think that's really helpful. Maybe you can speak a bit about that in terms of, we have a question here because we were talking about hospitals at one point. Melanie is wondering, if possible, can you share any specific examples of hospitals that are communicating impact and offers well in their direct mail pieces? And maybe we can broaden that scope to what Mike was talking about, when there isn't necessarily a specific or super urgent offer. It's just, we got to keep the lights on and we got to keep the machines running.
Yeah. Let's see. I used to serve City of Hope out of Los Angeles and the Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston. And both of those organizations did a good job, though I've not seen their fundraising in a couple of years. So I can't name anybody off the top of my head. Hospitals have a really hard time doing it. But I would also say that you know how there's some organizations that are born on third base and think they hit a triple? There are some causes that are so common ground and valued by everybody, kids, pets, hospitals, that you don't have to be as good to succeed. And so one of the things I'm hoping to sort of share today is, for those of us working for small organizations, we have to work a little harder. And the tactics that we're talking about that build good shares that we share are what helps those small organizations do sort of outperform their peers. Not that we're in a competition, but help you raise more money.
Becky, I'm not sure who asked that question, but if you wanted to follow up, we can for sure send some samples along to that person as well.
Yeah, we definitely can. No problem at all. Maybe if that person just wants to send me their email address in a private message, we can definitely do that. That's the end of the questions in the chat. I think just everything you said, Stephen, was stuff that people wanted to hear and stuff they want to bring back to their boards and to their leaders. Oh, here, one just came in as I was speaking. Andre would love to hear you speak about the importance of the end of year letter accompanying a tax receipt, and maybe just how to use that in the best way possible.
Well, let's see. I do not recommend including any tax information in an end of year letter or letters. I don't remember what the rules are in Canada, but in the US, you do not need to send a tax letter if you have been receipting your donors as they have been giving throughout the year. It's just a service, not a necessity. And in the US, in the 90s and early 2000s, we used to make a lot of hay with a tax letter in January or early Feb saying, hey, here's your giving for the past year. And if you'd like to give a gift to kick off this year, great. And then, at least in our experience, those just stopped working over the course of 5 or 6 years. Just results went down. And so now we don't recommend sending that out anymore, especially if you have been receiving donors as they've been giving throughout the year. But I would not include it in year-end fundraising.
Yeah, so in Canada, you typically send a tax receipt at the end of the year. You can send tax receipts for every single gift, but many organizations roll it up into one. We've got a question from Stephanie. Could you say more about offers for, as an example, a higher ed org wanting to raise money for additional faculty? So they need more faculty apart from a gift that pays for like 1 day of class. How might you break this down and have it seem like a good deal? We also face internal reluctance breaking down these costs because of the connection to salary amounts. Yeah.
Yep. It's really tough in the educational system right now for a host of reasons. If you've already thought about breaking it down by, per student per day over the course of a life of a teacher's tenure, which ends up a pretty low number in the grand scheme of things. I would be, the next place I would be going is, at least maybe two places, is I would be talking about how the students right now are lacking because of this thing that's not being taught. And the donor's gift today will bring a teacher who will teach that thing that will cause the students to be more well-rounded. So in this case, I would go in through a negative. Hey, we've got a problem. Our students don't know this. And that's causing problems in their careers. It's causing problems in our university's rating. This is a real problem. We've identified, so right, there's the problem, solution. We've identified a person who is perfect, who can teach this to our kids. They are warm, they are a good communicator. The students are really going to know this when they're done, right? You spin that up and then say, please send in a gift, your gift of any size, or maybe you merge in the donor's last gift amount or their last gift amount times 1.5 to help hire this person so that the kids can learn X and Y and Z. That'd be one way to go.
I feel for Stephanie here, because what happens in places where like arts, this happens, eds and the meds, you've got the brand team saying how amazing we are and like trying to recruit students, and the fundraising team saying we've got a problem, we don't have the right amount of teachers for our students. And comms and brand says, wait, you can't say we've got a problem, because we're out here saying we're like the best school to come to, and you'll have the best teachers, and you'll have, and there's this internal conflict, right? That's always so hard to navigate. I don't know if you found a way of bringing those, of reconciling that, Stephen, but
occasionally, yes, but it takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of work because you have to meet with the brand people and say, hey, listen, and there's some really core lessons that we fundraisers know, which is, okay, donors are adults, they're sophisticated, they can handle messages of things can get better and things are going great in the same way that you and I can in a relationship. And we're not all good all the time. If it was all good all the time, why do we need to raise any money? So, okay, so then you have this long conversation, but this happens over the course of 18 months before you get people to turn around and start to say, you know what, I can see how a donor has a bigger role in our organization if we ask them to solve a problem, as opposed to, hey, we're great, will you join us? But it's and obviously that whole summary right there is a short summary of a long process, but it takes a while and it takes a lot of time.
We've got another question here that just came in. It's going back to our conversation before about end of year tax receipts or annual gifting statements. Just wondering if there is any value to sending those annual gift statements with results without an immediate ask as well. Or would you suggest always including another ask?
I would never do that. I would never counsel an organization at the end of the year to send out something that doesn't have an ask and a reply card. It's sort of like saying, hey, the fish are running in this stream at this season, but I'm going to go out there that day with just a line but no hook. The fish are running, people want to give, people missed your first message, they're going to be out of town, they're going to miss your email messages, and basically you want to be asking at the end of the year. Our general approach is it's different because our Thanksgivings are at different places, but generally speaking, after the third week of November, there should be nothing other than asking. And for organizations where, hey, we send a Christmas card to all our donors and they love it and we're convinced it creates more giving, we cancel the Christmas card and we replace it with an appeal, and giving goes up and retention goes up. Or, hey, we do a magazine and we do a prayer request at blah, 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 and we cancel those at that time of year, and we do an additional ask of some kind, and giving goes up and retention goes up. Those things are good things, just not at that time in our experience.
I remember, Stephen, I saw you talk at the Nonprofit Storytellers Conference in San Antonio, and you shared a metaphor about revenue is like a stream. And if you don't dip into that stream, it's just going to flow right by, and someone else is going to pick that fish up out of it. And I always, that was just such a stark image for me, where You know, I think you also said there, you're going to miss more people than you offend.
Yeah.
You know, it's never going to dry up. People are always there, just ready to be brought into your mission. So,
yep. So and to just expand on that ever so slightly, most nonprofits have a sort of view of the potential revenue that they can raise as a pond. It's a pond with sort of, that's static, and that they drain it dry. And at midnight on the 31st, it is dry, brown, cracked earth. But then it magically refills on the 1st. And then they can draw it down to whatever the amount is, again, by the 31st next year. And that is a self-limiting belief. That's a story we tell ourselves that isn't helpful. And so the way we talk about it is that revenue is a river, not a pond. And it is flowing by every single day. And every day you're not sending an email. Every day you're not doing something good. Some revenue is floating by. I'm not advocating for asking every single day, but I am saying that there is so much more revenue available to us if we're willing to make the generous choice on behalf of our beneficiaries to dip our ladle in the pond a couple more times. And as you increase the cadence, as you start communicating to your donors more and asking and thanking and reporting, will you get some complaints? Yes. But you will get this many more complaints and this many more gifts and that much more retention. And so it's something that the big organizations get used to. They get used to a little bit of friction for the benefits of all of these other things. But you have to, but if you manage towards no complaints ever, you manage towards staying small. That's like managing towards never hitting a bug with your windshield. Well, that means I'm always going to go on side roads, not very fast. And you're just not going to get somewhere fast. And sometimes you need to be 2 provinces over in a couple of days. That lousy analogy, because I don't want to think of a donor as a bug on a windshield, but so this podcast was going really well, and I just.
Well, I think that's a good note to end it on. That's all for today. So at the end of every podcast episode, we give you a short action plan. So here's my short action plan for you. Take a sheet of paper and break it down into 4 different columns. Write down problem, solution, cost, and urgency. And next time you go to write a fundraising message, email, appeal, whatever it is, fill out those columns. What is the problem? What's the solution? What's the cost? And what is the urgency? It's how we structure all of our strategic briefs for every project. We identify some of these. So just have that handy. It's a very useful way to think about this. As always, thank you for hanging out with us around the fundraising campfire. If you want to be part of future Build Good Lives, just go to buildgood.com, sign up with the email address, and we'll make sure to invite you. If you're listening to this, if you're logged in here, you're my kind of people. I'm your kind of people. Thanks for the work you do, and thank you for building good in our world.